Kira pressed her scaled back against the cold metal wall as the footsteps approached. 2 years in this nightmare, and she still flinched at the sound. The rhythmic click-click-click of Dr. Vex's chitinous legs on the polished floor had become the soundtrack to her torment. Each step brought fresh horror. New experiments designed to map the neural pathways of suffering across different species. The Cathara scientists called it Project Mindbreak, a comprehensive study of how various sentient races responded to systematic psychological torture. The research was supposedly groundbreaking, destined to revolutionize their understanding of consciousness itself. At least that's what Dr. Vex told the funding committee and Cathara Prime. In reality, it was sadism dressed in academic robes. Kira's cell was one of 37 in the facility's detention wing. Each housed a different species, carefully selected for their unique neurological structures. The Threx male in cell 12 had been chosen for his species' empathic abilities. Watching him suffer while sensing the pain of others had provided fascinating data on emotional cascade failures. The young Zilani in cell 7 was there because her people's gills made them particularly sensitive to atmospheric manipulation. The elderly Vorthan in cell 23 had been selected for his species' eidetic memory, forcing him to relive traumatic experiences with perfect clarity had yielded insights into memory-based torture techniques. Today's session involved the holographic projector again. Kira closed her eyes, but it didn't matter. The images would be burned into her retinas whether she looked or not. Her homeworld, Zalthara, as it had been before the Cathara bombardment. Rolling purple grasslands under twin suns, crystal cities that sang in the wind. Her family's dwelling nestled in the coastal cliffs, where the tide pools glowed with bioluminescent life. Then came the fire. The hologram shifted to real footage from the attack. Kira watched her world burn for the 1000th time, knowing that every tear, every involuntary muscle spasm, every spike in her brain activity was being meticulously recorded. The electrodes attached to her skull felt like ice against her scales, their sensors drinking in her anguish like vampires feeding on blood. Fascinating how grief manifests in reptilian neural pathways, Dr. Vex chittered, his compound eyes reflecting the burning cities. Notice how the amygdala fires in conjunction with the hippocampus. Your species processes loss as a physical wound. Quite primitive, really. Kira had stopped responding to his taunts months ago. In the beginning, she'd screamed, pleaded, even tried to bargain. She'd offered information about Zilani technology, trade routes, anything that might make her useful alive rather than as a test subject. But Dr. Vex wasn't interested in intelligence. He wanted to understand how minds broke, how hope died, how the spark of consciousness could be systematically extinguished. The other prisoners had their own hells. Through the thin walls, Kira could hear Jorik, the Threx male, whimpering as they forced him to experience the emotional echoes of every other prisoner's torture. His empathic abilities, once a gift that let his people share joy and comfort, had become a conduit for concentrated suffering. The Cathara had discovered that Threx empaths could be overloaded, their minds fracturing under the weight of too much foreign pain. Dot in the cell next to hers, Mira, barely more than a child by Zilani standards, endured atmospheric torture. The Cathara would slowly alter the gas mixture in her cell, making it harder and harder to breathe through her delicate gills. They'd bring her to the edge of suffocation, then restore normal atmosphere just as she began to lose consciousness. The cycle repeated endlessly, mapping how her species' respiratory system responded to stress. The worst part wasn't the physical pain or even the psychological torment. It was the isolation. Each prisoner was kept separate, allowed only brief glimpses of the others during transport to the testing chambers. The Cathara had learned that social species suffered more when denied contact with their own kind. Loneliness was just another variable to be measured and exploited, but today felt different. There was tension in the air, a subtle change in the facility's routine, that Kira's predator instincts picked up on. The guards seemed nervous, their usual casual cruelty replaced by sharp, anxious movements. Dr. Vex had been called away twice during her session, his irritation growing each time his communicator buzzed. Then the alarm started. The holographic projector flickered and died as emergency lighting bathed the chamber in pulsing red. Kira's restraints automatically released, a safety protocol in case of facility breach. She sat up slowly, her muscles cramping from hours of forced immobility, and listened to the chaos erupting beyond her cell. Emergency docking protocols were activating. Kira had heard them only once before, during a supply run that had gone wrong when a transport ship's navigation system failed. But this was different. The automated voice was announcing an unscheduled arrival, a ship requesting emergency assistance. Through the observation window of her cell, Kira could see the main docking bay. A vessel was limping toward their hidden station, its hull scarred and blackened, atmosphere venting from multiple breaches. It was unlike any ship she'd seen before, angular where most vessels were curved, brutal where others were elegant. It looked like it had been built for war. The other prisoners were stirring too. She could hear movement from the adjacent cells, the first sounds of hope they'd made in months. Whispered conversations in a dozen languages, all asking the same question: who were these newcomers? Kira pressed her face against the reinforced transparasteel, straining to see more. The ship's hull bore markings she didn't recognize, symbols that looked almost primitive compared to the flowing scripts of most galactic civilizations. But there was something about them that spoke of strength, of a people who carved their identity into metal and meant it to last. Dr. Vex's voice echoed through the facility's communication system, sharp with barely controlled panic. All research staff, implement lockdown protocols immediately. Secure all test subjects and prepare for potential inspection. This is not a drill. Inspection? Kira's heart began to race. In 2 years, no one had come to inspect this place. The facility existed in the shadows, hidden in neutral space where no government held jurisdiction. The Cathara had chosen this location specifically because it was beyond the reach of galactic law. But as she watched the damaged ship settle into the docking bay, Kira felt something she'd thought was dead stirring in her chest. The other prisoners felt it too. She could hear it in their voices, see it in their movements. For the first time in 2 years, they had visitors who weren't here to hurt them. Heavy boots echoed in the corridor outside, a sound completely unlike the clicking of Cathara legs or the soft padding of the other species that staffed the facility. These footsteps spoke of weight, of purpose, of beings who walked like they owned whatever ground they stood on. A voice called out an accented galactic standard, the words carrying an authority that made Dr. Vex's protests sound like the chittering of an insect. This is Sergeant Santos. Terran Defense Corps. We're coming aboard. Terran, human. Kira's breath caught in her throat. Humans were legends, myths whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy. Warriors who never abandoned their own, who fought impossible odds and somehow won. Most species considered them fairy tales, stories told to children about heroes who didn't really exist. But as those heavy footsteps grew closer, as Dr. Vex's voice rose in increasingly desperate protests, Kira began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the legends were real. And they had finally come for her. Santos's combat scanner painted the facility's layout in stark blue lines across her visor display. 17 life signs registered in distress behind reinforced doors, their biosignatures screaming trauma even through the scanner's cold digital readout. Heart rates elevated, stress hormones off the charts, neural activity patterns consistent with severe psychological damage. Her jaw clenched as the data scrolled past. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't research. The facility director materialized in the corridor ahead. A towering mantis like Cathara, whose compound eyes reflected the emergency lighting like fractured mirrors, Dr. Vex moved with the fluid grace of a predator. But Santos had faced worse things than oversized insects. His diplomatic smile was all sharp mandibles and false courtesy. "Sergeant Santos, I presume? I am Dr. Vex, director of this research installation. While we appreciate your dramatic arrival, I must inform you that this is a legitimate scientific facility operating under proper galactic research protocols. You have no authority here." Santos didn't slow her advance. Her powered armor's servos whined softly as she moved, each step deliberate and measured. Behind her, Corporal Chun and Private Rodriguez flanked the corridor, their weapons lowered but ready. The message was clear. They weren't here for a social call. "Funny thing about emergency docking rights." "Doc," Santos replied, her voice carrying the flat authority of someone who'd seen too much and had no patience for lies. "They come with inspection privileges, especially when my scanner's picking up distress signals from 17 different sources." Dr. Vex's antennae twitched nervously. "Distress signals? I assure you, Sergeant, any readings you're detecting are simply the normal stress responses of research subjects undergoing voluntary psychological evaluation. All participants signed comprehensive consent forms. Voluntary." Santos's laugh was cold as vacuum. "Right. That's why you've got them locked behind blast doors in what my scanner's reading as isolation cells." She pushed past him, following her scanner's readings toward the detention wing. Dr. Vex scuttled alongside, his protests growing more frantic. "Sergeant, I must insist you respect the sanctity of ongoing research. These studies are vital to understanding the psychological frameworks of lesser species. The data we're collecting here will revolutionize." Santos stopped so abruptly that Dr. Vex nearly collided with her armored bulk. She turned slowly, her helmet's faceplate reflecting his image back at him in distorted fragments. "Lesser species?" The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop 10 degrees. Behind Santos, Chun and Rodriguez shifted their grips on their weapons, recognizing the tone. Their sergeant was about to do something that would probably require paperwork later. That is to say, the terminology is purely scientific," Dr. Vex stammered. "A classification system based on technological development and neural complexity. Nothing more." Santos resumed walking, but her hand now rested on her sidearm. "And I suppose these lesser species just volunteered to be your lab rats out of the goodness of their hearts." The first door she reached was marked with Cathara script that her translator rendered as Subject 2-3, a Threx male. Empathic variant. Santos's scanner showed a humanoid life form in severe distress. Neural activity spiking in patterns consistent with sensory overload. She keyed the door's emergency override, her command codes cutting through the facility's security like a hot knife through butter. The door hissed open, revealing a nightmare. The Threx male was barely adolescent by his species standards, his blue-gray skin pale and clammy with shock. He was strapped to a neural interface chair, dozens of electrodes attached to his skull and spine. His eyes were vacant, staring at nothing, but tears streamed down his face in an endless flow. Around him, holographic projectors displayed scenes of violence and suffering from across the galaxy, a carefully curated collection of atrocities designed to overwhelm his empathic abilities. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered, his weapon coming up instinctively. Santos felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. She'd seen war zones, refugee camps, the aftermath of orbital bombardments. But this was different. This was deliberate, calculated cruelty dressed up as science. She reached out and shut down the holographic projectors with a sharp gesture, plunging the chamber into merciful darkness. The Threx boy's eyes slowly focused, seeing her for the first time. His mouth moved soundlessly, trying to form words in a throat raw from screaming. Santos knelt beside the chair, her armored fingers surprisingly gentle as she began disconnecting the electrodes. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice modulator stripping away the electronic distortion. "You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here." Dr. Vex appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 security drones that hummed with barely contained energy. "Sergeant, you are interfering with a critical experiment. Subject 23A is in the middle of a breakthrough empathic cascade study. If you interrupt the process now, months of data will be lost." Santos stood slowly, her full height making her tower over the Cathara scientist. "Data." The word came out flat and dangerous. "That's what you call this?" "The subject volunteered for this study," Dr. Vex insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "All proper protocols were followed. The Galactic Research Council approved. Show me the paperwork." Santos's hand moved to her sidearm, the motion casual but unmistakable. "Right now. I want to see every consent form, every approval document, every piece of paper that says this is legal." Dr. Vex's mandibles clicked nervously. "The documentation is classified, above your security clearance, I'm afraid." Santos smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Doc, I've got emergency authority under the Terran Defense Corps' Emergency Response Protocol. That means I can classify your breakfast as a threat to galactic security if I want to. So I'll ask again, where's the paperwork?" The second door revealed worse horrors. A young Zelani female suspended in a sensory deprivation tank, her gills fluttering weakly as the facility's computers slowly altered the atmospheric mixture. Her scales had lost their natural luster, faded to a sickly gray that spoke of prolonged stress and malnutrition. Monitoring equipment tracked every aspect of her suffering, recording how her species' respiratory system responded to systematic torture. "Research," Santos spat, her voice carrying enough venom to melt steel. She keyed her come with sharp, angry movements. "Alpha Team, we have a code black situation. Initiate broken chain protocol." The response was immediate. Throughout the facility, her squad moved like clockwork, each team member heading for a different section. They'd trained for this scenario, the discovery of systematic abuse disguised as legitimate activity. The broken chain protocol was designed to secure evidence, protect victims, and ensure that those responsible faced justice. Dr. Vex's compound eyes widened as he realized what was happening. "You can't do this. This facility operates under diplomatic immunity. The Cathara government will. The Cathara government can file a complaint with the Terran embassy." Santos cut him off. "Right after they explain why their research facility is torturing children." She moved to the next door, her scanner showing another life sign in distress. Each revelation was worse than the last, a Vorthan elder forced to relive traumatic memories with perfect clarity. A Nexari child subjected to sonic torture that exploited her species' sensitive hearing. Beings from a dozen worlds, reduced to test subjects in someone else's twisted experiments. Dr. Vex made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. "You're making a terrible mistake, Sergeant. This research is vital to understanding the psychological frameworks of primitive species. The data we're collecting here will help the galaxy better integrate these lesser civilizations into." Santos spun around, her sidearm clearing its holster in one fluid motion. The targeting laser painted Dr. Vex's thorax with a red dot that didn't waver even slightly. "Funny," she said, her voice deadly calm. "They don't look like volunteers to me." The facility's main lab became a war zone in the span of heartbeats. Dr. Vex's security drones opened fire the moment Santos drew her weapon, their energy beams carving molten furrows in the corridor walls. But Santos's team had been expecting this. They moved with the lethal precision of soldiers who'd fought in the Outer Rim conflicts, their powered armor shrugging off the Cathara weapons like rain. Rodriguez went low, his assault rifle chattering as he put controlled bursts into the drone's sensor arrays. Chun flanked high, using his suit's jump jets to reach an elevated position, where he could rain suppressing fire down on the facility's security forces. Santos herself advanced straight through the chaos, her armor's shields flaring blue-white as energy beams splashed harmlessly against them. But this wasn't about firepower. This was about fury. The Cathara had made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that humans, like most species, would follow proper diplomatic protocols even in the face of atrocity. They'd expected negotiations, formal complaints, maybe economic sanctions. They hadn't expected soldiers who'd taken one look at tortured children and decided that some things were worth starting a war over. Santos reached the main laboratory as alarms shrieked throughout the facility. The chamber was a monument to clinical sadism. Dozens of monitoring stations surrounded a central observation deck where Dr. Vex and his team could watch their subjects suffer in real time. Holographic displays showed vital signs, neural activity patterns, and stress hormone levels from every prisoner in the facility. It was a conductor's podium for an orchestra of pain. Fascinating, Dr. Vex chittered, backing toward a secondary exit as his security forces crumbled around him. Your species' protective instincts are even more pronounced than our models predicted. Tell me, Sergeant, what drives you to such violence over the suffering of beings you've never met? Santos didn't answer. She was staring at one particular display, a feed from Cell 7 showing a Zalani child who couldn't be more than 8 standard years old. The little girl was curled in the corner of her cell, her scales dull with malnutrition, her gills fluttering weakly in the recycled air. Electrodes were attached to her skull, monitoring her brain activity as she endured whatever fresh hell the Cathara had devised for her. Something primal awakened in Santos at that moment. Not the trained aggression of a soldier, but something deeper. Something that reached back to humanity's earliest days, when protecting the young meant the difference between survival and extinction. She moved through the laboratory like an avenging angel, her weapon cutting down anyone who stood between her and the detention wing. The Cathara security forces were well-trained and well-equipped, but they'd never faced an enemy who fought with the desperate fury of a parent protecting their child. Because that's what this had become for Santos, not a rescue mission, but a family emergency. The door to Cell 7 was reinforced with military-grade armor plating, designed to contain even the most desperate escape attempts. Santos didn't bother with the electronic locks. She planted a breaching charge and stepped back, letting the explosion do what diplomacy couldn't. The child cowered as Santos entered, expecting more pain. 2 years of systematic torture had taught her that every new face meant fresh suffering. She pressed herself against the far wall, her large eyes wide with terror, her small hands raised defensively. Santos felt her heart break. She knelt slowly, removing her helmet to show her human face. The gesture was tactically stupid. It left her vulnerable to attack, but she needed the child to see her as a person, not another monster in armor. "Hey there, little one," she said softly, her voice carrying none of the hard authority she'd used with Dr. Vex. "My name's Maria. I'm here to take you home." The child's eyes widened in disbelief. She'd heard stories about humans, whispered legends passed down through the galactic community. Warriors who never abandoned their own, who fought impossible odds and somehow won. But those were just stories, weren't they? Fairy tales told to children to help them sleep. Santos reached out slowly, letting the child see her empty hands. "I know you're scared. I know you've been hurt. But that's over now. No one's ever going to hurt you again." The little girl's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from screaming. You're really human?" "Yeah, sweetheart. I'm really human. And humans don't leave kids behind." As Santos carefully lifted the child, disconnecting the electrodes with gentle precision, the other prisoners watched in stunned silence. Through the facility's internal monitors, they could see what was happening. These weren't the cold, calculating beings they'd known for 2 years. These were protectors. In Cell 12, Jorik the Threx felt Something he'd thought was dead stirring in his chest. Hope. The human soldiers moved through the facility with purpose, freeing prisoner after prisoner, treating each one not as a rescued asset, but as a person deserving of dignity and care. In Cell 23, the elderly Vorthan scholar wept as human medics tended to his wounds. They spoke to him in his own language, having downloaded translation protocols specifically for this mission. They asked about his pain, his needs, his family. When was the last time anyone had asked about his family? Dr. Vex made one last desperate play as Santos carried the Zelani child toward the exit. His chitinous fingers danced over a control panel, activating the facility's self-destruct sequence. If he couldn't have his research, no one could have anything. 30 seconds to core breach, the facility's computer announced with mechanical calm. All personnel evacuate immediately. Santos didn't even look back as she spoke into her com. Defiant, emergency beam out. All prisoners and evidence. Full facility scan for data recovery. Acknowledged, Sergeant. Transporter lock acquired. Beaming now. The familiar tingle of the transporter beam caught them just as the explosion bloomed behind them. The facility's fusion core, turning 2 years of systematic torture into expanding plasma and debris. Dr. Vex's final scream was lost in the roar of destruction aboard the human ship. The rescued beings received medical care unlike anything they'd experienced in captivity. Human doctors worked alongside alien specialists, their treatment guided not by clinical detachment, but by genuine compassion. They spoke softly, moved carefully, and never did anything without explaining it first. Kira found herself in the ship's medical bay, her scales slowly regaining their natural color as proper nutrition and care worked their magic. She watched the humans move among the other survivors, noting how they treated each species according to their specific needs. They'd studied alien physiology not to exploit it, but to heal it. Later, as the ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, Kira approached Santos in the observation lounge. The sergeant was staring out at the stars, her expression thoughtful. Why? Kira whispered, the question that had been burning in her chest since the rescue. Why risk everything for strangers? Santos looked down at her, and Kira saw something in the human's eyes that she'd never seen in Dr. Vex's compound gaze, empathy, understanding, the recognition that suffering was suffering, regardless of species. Because that's what we do, Santos said simply, her voice carrying the weight of human conviction. We don't leave anyone behind. Doesn't matter if you're human or Zelani or Threx or anything else. If you're hurting, if you need help, then you're family. And family protects family. Kira felt tears running down her scaled cheeks. For the first time in 2 years, they weren't tears of pain, they were tears of hope.